undercover officer made a buy this past weekend of mushrooms, marijuana, and a candy bar mushroom. The search warrant was issued, and about 7:30 Saturday night, we did a search warrant. With this much items there, we had no idea that this was all there. It ended up being a grow operation, a manufacturing operation. 2 suspects were identified, and they were each put on a $300,000 bond Saturday evening, Sunday morning.
These jars are filled with different things such as corn and grain, wheat, anything that can be nutrient to the fungus. What the suspect did at this time was inject the jars after this basically compost of nutrient was compiled. He actually injected the fungus, and then as you see here, it progresses down the line and begins to grow and grow and grow.
This right here is what they use to inject the canisters with the spores. It needs to be very clean environment. So what they did is they made something where no bacteria would get into. So he'd put the jar inside there with the corn, and then he would inject the spores into it. At that time, he'd put the tops back on them, and then he'd heat them up.
At some point, he had some in the fridge. We were able to obtain 6 or 7 jars of those. We have multiple jars, but obviously we don't want to put everything out here. As soon as it goes from this stage and it kind of turns into a mash, if you want to, we can step down here. Big balls, as you can. These in the bags, they're basically the balls made immediately, and because he wraps them in a plastic bag, due to the moisture and stuff like that, it actually aids in the fungus growing. Then from this stage, as soon as the mushrooms start to grow, from what the subject described to me, he actually made them like this because there's more surface area for the growing process to take place. As soon as these mushrooms, sometimes 2 to 3 days, that quick, as soon as they grow, they can be picked, and this ball will actually continue to grow. Eventually, as the nutrients begin to die, mold will just take over, as you see here.
From the start to finish, they say 3 weeks will start yielding this amount of mushrooms. If there's a certain type of mold, it'll actually poison the mushrooms. It'll actually be poison, which sometimes will cause a bad trip. And it does happen with people that don't know what they're doing when they're just trying to grow mushrooms.
Once the mushrooms are picked, he had them laid out, and they were actually being dried by fans, dehumidifiers all over the house. And from this stage, these are actually the edible mushrooms that you can directly ingest as they are here. Or you can actually, what this subject was doing was melting down different cocoa and chocolate bars, grinding up the mushrooms and mixing them in. Obviously, I don't think these would taste that great, but different things you can do. A lot of people put them on pizza, peanut butter, all sorts of things.
It was probably more of an operation to sell to people he knew and to dealers he knew or people he knew would distribute it out, but yeah, it would eventually make it to all the tourists. If he had say $4,000 worth of product on hand at the time, that wasn't the thing to look at. The thing to look at was what he was going to do every couple of days. Every couple of days he was going to multiply and get at least 2 grams off of each one of these balls that he's growing. So 2 grams multiplied by how many balls, by how many jars, by how many things, his operation could just continue for years.
Probably 100 different marijuana smoking devices. Actually, this bag weighs approximately a pound and maybe a few ounces, and it's actually mostly just stems and leaves where he had manicured off the actual marijuana bud, as you can see here. Different jars, different strains of marijuana, multiple different strains of seeds that this individual had.
This is something I've never seen. I looked into it a little bit, and it's actually to separate herbs. Probably what he used for the marijuana buds to grind it up to smaller pieces.
It surprised me that it was going on where it was. Those condos are really small. There's a lot of them together. There's a lot of neighbors. It's just hard to believe that nobody saw anything or smelled anything, or maybe they did and didn't know what they were experiencing. And it's just amazing that you go in somebody's home and find it to be just an operation instead of a place to live.